In the words of Ray Spears, you can tell a lot about a person's relationship to blackness by the quotes that they share on Martin Luther King Jr. Day. What's up, y'all, and welcome to Durag Thoughts. My name is Trevor Went. I'm a visual artist based out of Raleigh, North Carolina. And Durag Thoughts is a space where we talk about topics that challenge perspectives and give hope to the marginalized and oppressed. And today, I want to talk to y'all about this idea of the pacification of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., or rather, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., because we gonna honor this man by every last one of his prefixes. Can I get an amen? Okay, y'all can't really amen in this situation, but I hope you amen wherever you're at today. So, this is what I mean by the idea of pacification. It is this idea of either misshaping or misusing or shifting Dr. King's legacy to be more palatable by American culture, to be something less radical than he actually was, to fit the ideologies and the standards that American culture, American white culture, more specifically, wants Dr. King to sit within, or has wanted Dr. King to sit within. You know, we see this kind of phenomenon every year around Martin Luther King Jr. Day, where countless people take to their social media feeds and they begin, posting quotes and different things about Dr. King. And many of these quotes are definitely accurate Dr. King quotes, but they're used in a way that kind of shift the narrative of his legacy and his perception and the culture. For example, we had a situation this year where Vice President Mike Pence used a Dr. King quote just a couple weeks ago to kind of use it to support Trump's actions in trying to create a border wall in Mexico. He says this in the quote. One of my favorite quotes from Dr. King was, "Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy. You think of how he changed America. He inspired us to change through the legislative process to become a more perfect union. That's exactly what President Trump is calling on the Congress to do." To liken Donald Trump to Martin Luther King is absurd as it is. And Dr. King even stood against the Berlin Wall. Dr. King would not have been about building a wall to bar off immigrants. You have moments where there's these statements that are very off mark, like, President or Vice President Pence's situation and the things that he said. And then we also have moments that are more subtle. One of the most popular Dr. King quotes is this quote that says, "Darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that." And it often gets used as some sort of attempt to legitimize an action, or some sort of attempt to teach us Black people that King would not have approved of our social unrest or actions of protest, which is absurd because literally that is what King stood for in a lot of ways in nonviolent, peaceful protests. You also have people misusing the "I have a dream" speech to kind of create some absurd concept that King would have ascribed to a colorblind ideology. And what I mean by colorblind ideology is that I don't see people of different races. I don't see color. I just see people. King wasn't like that. People will use his idea that people should be judged by the content of their character, not the color of their skin, as some sort of way to shift and say that he didn't believe in seeing color, which is kind of absurd, considering that in the same exact speech, he talked about little Black boys and little Black girls and little white boys and little white girls. He made distinctions of races. And he often talked about the plight of the Negro. It doesn't really make sense that King would ascribe to some sort of ideology like that. But for some reason, people think that he did. Or you have moments like when Dodge used a King sermon, which was speaking against capitalism, in an ad to sell trucks. See, the truth of the matter is that Dr. King was far more radical and more hated than a lot of people try to paint him as. King was more than his "I have a dream" speech. And even towards the end of his life, he viewed some of his ideas in the "I have a dream" speech as, kind of naive, a little bit overly optimistic, and kind of said that it needed to be held in a space of, realism, solid realism, as he put it. King was viewed as so dangerous to America that the FBI sent him a letter and threatened to blackmail him if he didn't kill himself in 34 days. And even at the time of his death, a poll showed that he was the most hated man in America at the time. But you don't really hear about that. And a lot of history books want to talk about that. And a lot of people want to talk about how America perceived and stood against the mission and the efforts of Dr. King. King spoke boldly against racism. He spoke boldly against capitalism and militarism and the Vietnam War. He spoke against poverty, and he was holistically committed to justice. So what I want to do today, as we kind of walk into this space of Durag Thoughts, is to kind of engage some of these quotes and clips from Dr. King to kind of get a holistic view of him and allow for him to help shape how we view him and how we work towards justice. So this first quote is from the letter from Birmingham jail, and it reads this: "I must confess that over the past few years, I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in his stride towards freedom is not the white citizen's counselor or the Ku Klux Klaner, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice." Like I said, you can find this quote in the letter from Birmingham jail, which was written to 8 white clergymen who were against King's march on Washington. They criticized him for some of his demonstrations and his methods towards trying to create change in America. And it aimed at these white church leaders in what I would call a prophetic way, prophetic meaning speaking truth to power. I think this is one of the most important letters to read from King. One, to get a good view on what King believed, but also especially for church leaders, especially white pastors in America, to get a feel of the things that he spoke against and the ways that he saw white church leaders standing in the way of the pursuit of what was good and right and true and just in this world. And so I will link this in the show notes and also link it in the description on the YouTube page for those who are watching on either podcast or on YouTube. Next thing I want to hit up is this NBC clip, which was from an interview that happened 11 months before King was assassinated.
And it seems to me that white America must see that no other ethnic group has been a slave on American soil. That is one thing that other immigrant groups haven't had to face. The other thing is that the color became a stigma. American society made the Negro's color a stigma, and that can never be overlooked. So I think these things are absolutely necessary. The other thing is that America freed the slaves in 1863 through the Emancipation Proclamation of Abraham Lincoln, but gave the slaves no land or nothing in reality, and as a matter of fact, to get started on. At the same time, America was giving away millions of acres of land in the West and the Midwest, which meant that there was a willingness to give the white peasants from Europe an economic base. And yet it refused to give its black peasants from Africa, who came here involuntarily in chains and had worked free for 244 years, any kind of economic base. And so emancipation for the Negro was really freedom to hunger. It was freedom to the winds and rains of heaven. It was freedom without food to eat or land to cultivate, and therefore it was freedom and famine at the same time. And when white Americans tell the Negro to lift himself by his own bootstraps, they don't look over the legacy of slavery and segregation. I believe we ought to do all we can and seek to lift ourselves by our own bootstraps, but it's a cruel jest to say to a bootless man that he ought to lift himself by his own bootstraps. And many Negroes, by the thousands and millions, have been left bootless as a result of all of these years of oppression and as a result of a society that deliberately made his color a stigma and something worthless and degrading.
So in this video, you kind of hear King talk about this ideology of this bootstraps situation. And some of you may have heard this from people that Black people need to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and not ask for handouts. And it's really interesting. If you look into American history, you can look up something called the Homestead Act, where the government was giving handouts, literally was giving grants to white men to go and start families and learn how to farm and all these different things to inhabit land that was purchased in Louisiana, to move out west to kind of inhabit that land. And so it's funny because you'll have people who are saying, don't ask for handouts, this, and this, when so many white people in this country have generational wealth based upon a government handout from the Homestead Act. And so it's super interesting because I love how King kind of pressed into the idea of slavery and being in slavery for hundreds of years, but never being given any sort of compensation for that. There's no reparations. There's nothing for us to get ourselves out of poverty or anything like that. We were thrown into a space of poverty and then told to lift ourselves up, which is extremely cruel. The last clip that I want to bring to your attention today is from his last speech, which was from the night before that he was murdered. And it was called, "I've Been to the Mountaintop." So I hope you enjoy this clip.
All we say to America is be true to what you said on paper. If I lived in China or even Russia or any totalitarian country, maybe I could understand some of these illegal injunctions. Maybe I could understand the denial of certain basic First Amendment privileges because they haven't committed themselves to that over there. But somewhere I read of the freedom of assembly. Somewhere I read of the freedom of speech. Somewhere I read of the freedom of press. Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest far right. And so just as I say we aren't going to let any dogs or water hoses turn us around, we aren't going to let any injunction turn us around. Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. But it really doesn't matter with me now because I've been to the mountaintop. I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
So like I said, this was from King's last speech. The sanitation workers in Memphis were striking because of poor working conditions and poor wages, and King went and stood in solidarity with them. King knew that his life was in danger. He had been the victim of many death threats. He'd been the victim of an assassination attempt. He had all these sort of things going against him. He even tells a story earlier in this speech where even that day that he was coming into Memphis on the plane, that the pilot apologizes to the passengers that it's taking a long time to take off because Dr. King was aboard, and they needed to double check, triple check the plane to make sure that it was safe to fly, because someone could be trying to assassinate Dr. King and, you know, bomb the plane or some sort of instance like that, some sort of situation like that. And Dr. King knew, walking into Memphis, going where he was going, that he was putting his life and his future and all of these different things in safety, or not in safety, but at risk. He kind of put his safety on the line, rather, but he refused to live passively. He was hated, he was threatened, and he stood against everything that America wanted for Black people at the time. And all that he kept pushing for was, as he said, we just asked America to be true to what you said on paper. You know, we see him speaking truth to power, living a life that stepped on people's toes and stepped on the toes of oppressors and oppression and the American government, and challenged, you know, America to make things right. One of the lines from this particular quote that really stand out to me is, I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people are going to get to the promised land. So what I want you all to take away from this video, from our time together today, is I want you to be aware of who the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King really was, and how much people try to morph his legacy in something that is more palatable. King didn't believe in colorblind rhetoric. King didn't believe in a love that leads to inaction. He didn't believe in any sort of passive peace, which is the absence of tension, as he talked about in the letter from Birmingham jail. But he believed in a positive peace, which is the presence of justice. He was for protesting. He was for speaking out. He was for standing up for Black people and poor people and human rights in general. King was against violence and militarism and systems that created poverty. He was so for justice in our world. He followed the legacy of biblical prophets who valued the truth over safety. King was interested in work that transformed systems to eradicate issues rather than just patching them. King was focused on justice and a holistic change. So I want y'all to get to know the true Dr. King. So I'm going to drop links from the things that I talked about earlier in the show notes or the description on YouTube. And I'll also drop some links to some other content that I think you would really glean from reading or hearing from him. And also, I want to hear from y'all. What are some of the most impactful things that you've heard from Dr. King? You can drop a comment below. Also, subscribe to this channel, share this channel, and hit the bell so that you get notifications on when new videos come out. And yeah, I don't want you to miss an episode, so make sure you do that. Also, this is the last thing that I want y'all to take from this. Remember that progress is not passive. Be easy, y'all.